Hello, everyone, and welcome to the launch of the new novel from Amanda Bridgman. It's called The Sensation, and it's actually the second one in her absolutely incredible Salvation series. So Amanda has walked this tightrope between two genres, crime and sci-fi, and has pulled off this exceptional feat of a book. The first book actually won the she's a Tinned Up award-winning author. So we're so happy to be launching this brilliant novel. We can't be there in person, partly because it's in Australia and partly because there's a pandemic on. But we have brought together this digital event so Amanda can do a reading, so you can hear a little bit of a sneak section of this incredible new book. But we can also have a little bit of Q&A and hear what Amanda has to say about the writing process, about genre, and about all the other things that have been going on in the world this year. But first and foremost, I'm actually going to pass you over to Amanda, who's going to introduce the book herself and do a little reading for us.
Okay.
Amanda?
Thank you very much, Eleanor. Hello, everyone. So I'm Amanda Bridgman. I'm an Australian author, most recently known, obviously, for the Salvation series that's out now through Angry Robot Books. Also known for the Aurora series. I didn't put those books on display because there's currently 7 books in the series and I'm writing the 8th. So there's far too many to show. But there's another novel as well called The Time of the Stripes, which is kind of like The Leftovers meets The Lord of the Flies. That's what I'm calling my alien contact drama. So that's it. So we're here to talk about the Salvation series. Now, in order to talk about the Salvation, to talk about the Sensation, the second book in the series, it's important to talk about the series as a whole. So it takes place in the near future. It's set in the near future, several years after an event known as the Crash. So the Crash has happened. We're in a place where early adopters of connected neural implants have been the victims of a terrorist attack. And as a result, many have been left either brain damaged or dead from this terrorist attack. So as a result, there's been a bit of a falling out in society. Some people have pulled away from technology and set up tech pull-away communities outside the cities. And so they've turned their back on the technology, but there's also a group of people who are really annoyed that as a result of the crash, the government has made neural implants illegal and taken them off the market. And so these people are quite the opposite, and they're wanting to hold on to their tech even tighter than ever. So there's a bit of a division in society. And so in The Subjugate, this starts off with a murder of a young woman in a religious tech pull-away community. And Detective Salvi Brent and her partner go out to the religious tech pull-away community to investigate the murder, which turns into a series of murders and then a hunt for a serial killer. So that's largely takes place in the tech pull-away community. And what I do then in The Sensation is this case is set in the city. So this is very, very full of the technology, whereas the other one has less of it. So in The Sensation, we've had a spate of violent attacks on the streets, and we've come to a point where one of Salvi Brent's fellow officers has been murdered, found brutally murdered. And as a result, they discover there's a new drug tech experience on the streets, and they're out then to try and hunt down the person responsible for it. So in a brief nutshell, that's the world and the story of The Subjugate and also The Sensation. So, and you're going to do reading.
Yes,
reading.
Please. We would love to hear a reading from the books. It's also important to say that both these books, whilst obviously they feature, a main character threading you through, they've got that incredible crime thing where they're a complete mystery within the nutshell of the pages. So you don't have to have read the first one to read the second one. You can kind of drop in and out, but you do get a richer experience if you've read the first one. So.
Yep, absolutely. So in terms of reading, I'm just going to read a section at the start of chapter 2 called Absent Minds. And there is a mention of a character in here who's not described, but it's a character of Riverton, who is the department's AI. So I just wanted to give that little note to start. So Okay, absent minds. Actually, let me just put my eyes in because I need them.
An important section of reading.
Very important. Okay. Salvi stood on the apartment's balcony, dressed in her crime scene containment suit, gloves, and sole plates, as she studied the body before her. The man whom Riverton had identified as 34-year-old Devon Barker, the owner of the apartment, lay face down, surrounded by shattered glass. Beside him on the ground lay a metal pole of some kind, no doubt the reason for the back of his skull being smashed in. Jesus, Beggs muttered as he crouched down to take a better look. His wrinkled face studied the wounds. That's got to take some effort. Salvi nodded in agreement. Or some anger. Wonder what he did to deserve that. Beggs stood up again, groaning a little and rubbing his creaky knees. Let's ask the girlfriend that. He left the balcony and stepped back inside the apartment. Salvi glanced up at the police drone hovering in the sky close by, filming the scene. Then she turned and followed Beggs inside. It was a high-spec pad in a high-spec neighbourhood, minimalist with lots of white, smooth surfaces and everything controlled by the house AI. At least, when the house AI was working. The system had apparently crashed and was currently offline. The tenants were young and beautiful, at least the guy had been before the pole to his head. From the looks of the moving photos on the walls, the woman was a model, and from the equipment laying around, the victim had probably been the photographer. They found the girlfriend in the bedroom with a beat cop named Vincent watching over her. She was sitting in bed with the satin sheets resting around her waist. She had a petite frame and dark bottle blonde hair and East Asian features. Her top half was adorned in a pink slinky camisole, and her hair was all messed up like she'd been sleeping, or maybe fighting. The woman looked tired, numb. Perhaps she was still drunk. Salvi spotted an empty wine bottle on the bedside table and clothes strewn across the floor. She smelled incense and saw the remnants in a small glass container on a dresser. She been there the whole time? Beggs asked Officer Vincent, who nodded. We came out in a domestic disturbance. Neighbours reported glass smashing and banging. When we got here, another neighbour told us about the body on the balcony. No one answered our knocks, so we broke the door down. Found her in bed. Looked like she just woke up at the sound of our arrival. Beggs nodded, and Salvi stepped closer to the woman, angling the projection of a hollow badge toward her. I'm Detective Brent, and this is Senior Detective Beggs, she pointed to her partner. We need to ask you some questions about what happened here tonight. The model looked at Salvi, but her eyes were distant. That's you in the photos on the wall, right? Salvi asked. You live here? She nodded, still vague and looking a little green, like maybe she wanted to throw up. What's your name? Salvi asked. The model didn't answer. Instead, she just stared at nothing, her long hair hanging forward over the sides of her face. Salvi clicked her fingers in front of the woman until her gaze moved back to hers. Salvi was starting to question whether her state was due to some narcotic rather than the wine. Have you taken something? Salvi asked. Do you need medical attention? We offered that before, Vincent said. She declined, said she just wanted to sleep. We'll get you some medical attention, huh? Salvi said. But the woman shook her head and turned back to stare at nothing. Beggs moved over to a small glittery handbag lying on the floor. He picked it up in his gloved hands and rifled through until he pulled out some ID. Mikey Natashi, Beggs said. Salvi turned back to the woman. Mikey, that's your name? The woman continued to stare at nothing. Hey, Mikey, Salvi called to her, snapping her fingers again. You need to tell us what happened. Did you attack your boyfriend out there, or did someone else do this? Mikey rubbed her hand over her face and shivered. Salvi eyed the slinky top she wore, then moved to where a jacket lay nearby on the floor. She picked it up and went to drape it around Mikey's shoulders, but as soon as Salvi touched her, the woman flinched back, scrambling away. As she did, Salvi saw she was naked from the waist down, then noticed bruises on her wrists and minor bloodstains on the mattress. She turned to the officer. Get a paramedic in here. She looked back at the cowering, still-dazed woman as Vincent vacated the room. Mikey, it's okay. We're here to help you. We're going to take you to the hospital to get checked out, all right? Rape and murder? Beggs said quietly. Salvi nodded. Maybe. Vincent returned with the paramedic, who, armed with a needle, tried to approach Mikey, but it only made the woman cower even more, throwing herself out of bed and crawling into the corner of the room. No, 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 she whimpered, still dazed. Salvi moved to her. It's all right, Mikey, we're not going to hurt you. The woman suddenly lashed out and nails slashed down the side of Salvi's neck. Wincing, Salvi grabbed the woman's arms and pinned them at her sides. Mikey screamed and struggled in response. No, no more, please, she cried. Can I get some sedation here? Salvi barked, holding her down. The paramedic swooped in and jabbed a needle into the woman's arms. Mikey's eyes filled with tears. No more, please. The room filled with her soft cries as they waited for her body to relax and her eyes to close before they hauled her onto a gurney. Salvi watched as they covered and strapped her in. They were about to wheel her out of the apartment when she noticed a mark on the side of Mikey's face. Wait, Salvi told the paramedic, stepping closer. She took Mikey's unconscious chin and turned her face to view both sides of it. There were two strange markings on either temple, indentations, like something had been pressed against her skin. Salvi glanced around the room but couldn't see any kind of fashion headwear that Mikey might have worn that night. She looked back to the unconscious woman and the strange indentations. She knew her holo badge would be recording footage, but Salvi engaged her iPort camera and captured the markings regardless. When she was done, she nodded for Vincent and the paramedic to take Mikey away and uploaded the images to Riverton to put in the case file. We'll get more sense out of her when she sleeps it off anyway, Beggs said. Salvi nodded and touched her burning neck. She pulled her gloved fingers away to see blood on them. Beggs chuckled. A cat fight in your first day back, Salv? That a girl. Salvi shot Beggs an unaffected look. Thanks for your help, by the way. Beggs shrugged. You had it covered. So I think I'll leave it there. Is that enough?
That's perfect. It's
perfect.
I'm so excited for people to be able to read this. It's been out in UK, US for a while, but because of the pandemic, it's taken a while to actually get to the books to where Amanda lives in Australia. So very excited for all the Australians to be able to get their hands on it. So it's just such an amazing world to be in. But I wanted to ask you a little bit. So this is the second book, as we've discussed. You set up out the worlds for us so nicely, so that if you want to just dip into this one rather than starting with the first one, it's possible. But when you finished the first book, The Subjugate, in 2018, did you already know what Salvi's next case was going to be?
I did. I have this thing where I get about 3/4 of the way through a book, and I just normally like the next stories already fully germinating in my mind, and I remember being about 3/4 of the way through the first book, and the key murder in the sensation, that the murder of Salvi's colleague was very. That scene was very, when they find the person, it was very clear in my mind, and so that kind of, it started there and it kind of unravelled from there. So yeah, I did have an idea, and stretching that out further, I've basically got a plan in place for a quartet of books. So again, a different case to solve in each one, so you could pick them up and read them as standalones. But if you do read from the start, you get that richer experience, and then a bit of an overarching series arc as well.
Well, it's like knowing the detective, knowing the friend. It's my favorite thing about crime novels, is that you get that like complete solved world, but you get kind of a friend to take it along, and you also learn bits about their lives and their progress as they go along, which I think is such a fun thing to do in sci-fi as well, giving us, instead of this huge overarching trilogy where you don't actually get the story completed until the end of the third book, there is instead this kind of, there are rewards, I think, for the readers who are with you throughout it, but it's still just as rewarding to have that case and the world closed for you as it is to have the kind of background story ticking along, or the interpersonal stuff ticking in the background. But one of the other things I actually want to ask you about is, one of my favorite things about The Sensation is the kind of technology that you've put into this world, this kind of technological playground that you work with. Did you research the science behind neural implants, drug tech, etc., all the other kind of things that go on in the background of the book, in the world creation? Or was it kind of, or did you just like, I don't want to know about the science, I'm just going to let my imagination run wild? Which path did you take?
For me, I think it's a bit of both. Basically, you need to make sense when you're writing things. So I did do a bit of research on neural implants, but you do have to let your imagination run wild too. But it was the same with I've always been fascinated with serial killers, not in a good way, just in a way of just kind of wanting to understand the why behind them. So, so again, there was a little bit of research there, but I'd already kind of through my life had done a lot of research anyway. And then for the first book, obviously there's the whole religious aspect too. And I think it's important to let people know I was actually raised a Catholic. I actually, 15 years of Catholic schooling. So it is something I know a little bit about and have opinions on. And that's kind of the themes that do keep popping up through the series. The exploration of, obviously, technology. It's such a hot topic today about tech addiction and whether it's in gaming or social media. So I've always found that quite fascinating too, because as a writer, you need to be on social media and you need to spend time on there daily because it's part of the job. But I can also see how easily it can consume you, and you look up and there's an hour gone, and the dopamine hits and things like that. So the tech, the religion, the cop work, and the catching killers. All fascinating, all done a bit of research, but also it's fiction and it's entertainment. So we need to have creative license.
Absolutely. So one of the other questions I wanted to ask you is to talk a little bit. So I know that there might be some exciting news on the horizon about a possibility of a TV thing on the cards for Selby, fingers crossed. Can you tell us anything more about that than I've already said? And can you also talk a little bit about your screenwriting work? Because I know you've done some screenwriting in the past. I wanted to talk a little bit about how it's different trying to work with perhaps an adaptation of your work versus writing something for screen in a completely kind of independent setting, not tied to a book. How do you thread that needle?
Okay. I can't really say much about the TV option for The Sensation, other than it's pretty exciting.
So exciting.
There's some very exciting production companies involved. Obviously, COVID slowed things down, but hopefully next year things are going to ramp up again, and fingers crossed. So I can't really say much more than that, other than, it's exciting, fingers crossed, but one must also keep one's feet on the ground because it's the screen industry. Things can be going swimmingly and then suddenly it's off the boil. So fingers crossed we can go all the way, but feet on the ground as well. And in terms of screenwriting, I studied film and television at university many moons ago. And actually, when I sat down to write my first Aurora novel, I actually sat down to finally write a screenplay that I'd been meaning to write for years. But I kind of got to the point where I realised I really hadn't worked out enough of the story, so I couldn't do the screenplay. I had to work the story out first. So I decided to write that as a novel, and that became Aurora Darwin, my first novel that got published. And then suddenly I went down this series and 5 books later I never got back to writing that screenplay. I really need to do that. So I kind of have been spending the last few years just brushing up the skills and getting back into it. The plan is to adapt all my work if possible. I've written a TV pilot for the Aurora series. It's in first draft, so no one's seeing it just yet. But I've also very interested in writing original stuff that's not adaptation. So I recently wrote a Australian feature film it's an Australian comedy drama, and that was a finalist in a couple of pitch competitions, including an actor pitch competition. And so I'm actually working with a producer on that now. So it's pretty exciting, but again, who knows where it's going to go? But it's all a fascinating learning experience, and I'm loving every minute of it.
We've had so many questions, which is really exciting. I'm going to switch to, rather than my questions, I'm going to switch to some of the audience questions so that we have a bit more time to fit those in. So the first question from the audience is, this series combines crime and sci-fi in a really interesting way. Did you take inspiration from crime fiction and police procedurals when you're putting together the idea for the series? And are you a longtime fan of crime fiction and drama?
I am. I've you know, I'm an 80s kid, so like cop shows were just like air and water, really. Um, so yes, they're two of my favourite genres is the crime, mystery, and sci-fi. And yeah, so for me it was a natural blend. But even like that said, with my Aurora series, um, though they are a military unit, there's still quite a mystery element to it,
Mm-hmm.
of them uncovering things in every book. So I think it's there, inherent in all my work in some form, just different degrees of it. But yeah, big fan of both, and there will be more.
Exciting. And another audience question is, why did you choose San Francisco as the setting for the series? Have you spent a lot of time there? If the series continues, what other parts or the wider world you've created would you be interested in exploring?
I would. I've been to San Francisco a couple of times. I've actually got a friend that lives there, my old flatmate from London. Hello, Hank. So yeah, I've been there a couple of times, and I just thought there's so many novels set in LA, New York, especially when they're like kind of, you know, cyberpunky.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted, I just liked the idea of it being near the Silicon Valley, even though obviously there's tech centers everywhere these days.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just the Silicon Valley, but that was kind of the reasoning for it, to set it there, just for something a little bit different.
Would you be interested in exploring further afield in this world you've created, or are you dedicated to San Francisco?
I would. It's definitely a world that's big enough that you could
Mm-hmm.
you could have a whole different string of series. Really, you could have,
Like the
you know,
CSIs.
exactly. I would call me. Yes, you could definitely have like your Hollywood or your Chicago, and even your Australian. I've been asked before, like, why didn't you set it in Australia? And it's like, well, in terms of the population, the America just kind of works for
Mm-hmm.
this kind of cyberpunky feel than Australia. Australia's very, you know, the cities are populous, but it's just you don't have that claustrophobic kind of feeling like you
Mm-hmm.
do with the US, I think.
So, what's your favorite part about revisiting a world you've created when you're writing a sequel or something within the same world?
Definitely visiting the characters again. It's you spend so much time with them and you get to know them so well, that you kind of want to catch up with them again, but also see where they're going to go next. And I'm often awful to my characters, so it's really not see where they go next, but see how much damage I can do to them next, really, and then see if they can dig their way out again. So and they still love me for it and come back, I'm sure. But yeah, so it's the characters, and I honestly think that that's why most readers come back to a series is for the characters.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, you need a page turning plot if you can, you know, do that. But it's the characters. It's always the characters that bring people back. So, and I've had people kind of say that my female characters are not necessarily like 100% likable, but they grow to like them. They're kind of they can be a little bit kind of standoffish at first, but once they get to know them, they kind of understand why they're like that. So
Well, it's nice not always reading Mary Sue's, right? It's nice reading someone who is
yeah,
flawed and grows and changes. I don't want to read about a perfect magic person who fixes everything. It will just make me feel bad about myself. So
yeah, exactly.
I've got another audience question for you. It's also about series. So it's really about the Aurora series. So when you write a series like the Aurora with 7 books, brackets, soon to be a exclamation mark, I agree with that, exclamation mark, close brackets, are you able to keep the whole thing set in your head, or do you have to reread the earlier books to remind yourself of things?
I do flick back to the earlier books just to check detail,
Mm-hmm.
but the story, don't need to remember that. Again, I've been working on the Aurora series for probably over 10 years now. So I spent a lot of time in the Aurora crew. And yeah, and it's I set out to write one book, which was Aurora Darwin, and it just grew. And it's kind of like you can kind of read like the first 4 books. There's kind of one arc, and then in book 4, Aurora Centralis, it kind of explodes open wide, and suddenly this large arc develops. So that's where I am now, coming to the end of the series. I had always planned 8 books in that series. I think it's going to be 9, although I did have a psychic tell me it was going to be 10. So it depends.
So watch this space.
Watch this space. Depends how far I get in book 8. But then we need to have, like, spoiler, a big war that happens at the end. So whether that war is tied up in book 9 or whether it needs to stretch out to book 10, we shall soon find out if that psychic's right.
So the Salvation books themselves seem to take this inspiration from the world of cyberpunk. Is that an aesthetic and a genre that you're a particular fan of? And are there any certain books, movies, games, anything creative that have inspired you in that space?
I do. One early reader described Subjugate as like Blade Runner meets The Wire. I don't think it's not as near as far future, as Blade Runner. So I don't want people to. There's no flying to other planets. It's very much Earth based. But in terms of like aesthetics, I do absolutely love Blade Runner 2049, and that's kind of also the aesthetics of Altered Carbon. It's beautiful to watch. The settings, the production design. So that's kind of how I picture it. But with the kind of the storytelling of, I was a huge fan of season 1 of The Sinner, which kind of has some similarities really in the way that deals with like religion and things like that. What else? True Detective. So it's kind of like I'm using all screen works, but sometimes that's just the easiest way to explain it. But yeah, so that's kind of the feelings that I get. But also a great inspiration is Pinterest. If you go through there and you look at all the artwork on there, there's a lot of great like cyberpunk and futuristic artwork on there. And so you can spend hours in there just looking at all these pictures, and if that doesn't inspire various storylines from all the images on there, then I don't know what will.
It's so interesting. I do think the thing about your books is that they are visual when you read them. They feel like this very kind of like, you feel like you're moving through the world. You obviously have those incredible rich interior lives of the characters and the mystery that you're solving, but there is this real feeling of mood, because I think all the kind of TV shows and films that you mentioned are things which have this kind of like incredible mood, this visual mood to them. And it's definitely something that threads through the series. And you can see in your writing that perhaps that screenwriter background of your training. But the final question from the audience is, which of the Salvation books did you find it easiest or quickest to write, and how long did it take from idea to first draft?
Well, funnily enough, I worked on the Subjugate for a little while, because I was kind of doing that in the background while I was doing Aurora and Time of the Stripes. And then, of course, I got the contract for the Sensation, and I also had another contract for another novel and a short story that required a lot of research. So out of necessity, I had to write the Sensation very fast, but it was easy to do because I already had the story in my mind, you know, from writing the Subjugate. So yeah, it was I think it's possibly the fastest I've ever written a first draft of a novel. That may have been evident when I submitted it, Eleanor. But, you know, that's what editing's for. So yeah, so I did write that quite fast, but yeah, story was there. So
And you were writing something else at the same time because you're doing some really cool IP tie-in work for the Pandemic board game, which I think we've discussed before. You've had to delay the publication of that because it seems like a weird time to publish a novel about a pandemic. But how did you find writing IP alongside writing your own creative ideas?
Look, I found it quite easy, and part of the reason was because it's the first novel in the series. So I obviously, I had the game, I had the character roles to work from. And, you know, the theme of the game, which is all about cooperation and teamwork. So I kind of had those boundaries, but as it was the first novel, I got to establish the characters and, you know, help set up the organisation and all that sort of stuff. So it almost was like doing something original. And by comparison, I did a short story for Warhammer, which hopefully is going to come out soon, I'm not sure. And that's obviously, Warhammer's been around for ages, and trying to get my head around all the lore and what you can and can't do with the characters. You know, for a short story, I had to do a lot of research, and there was a lot of back and forth with the editors making sure that, you know, I stick, because they're very strict about their rules, obviously. So, so yeah, it's, but that said, it was great to, if you know, basically, if you want to be a screenwriter, you need to be able to do that anyway. You need to be able to, you know, you might be given someone else's world that you need to write in. So I found it a great experience to kind of sharpen those skills of, yep, this is the world I'm writing in. I've got to stick to these rules. So, yeah, I loved it.
Amazing. So just for all of our listeners, because we're going to tie up now, because you said it was going to be half an hour, and I've overrun slightly, but it's Amanda's fault because she's too interesting.
Sorry.
But so Sensation is out now. It's available in Australia to buy. Subjugate is also obviously around. Please buy it. It is such a great time if you have not read it. And then follow on with this one. But Amanda's next book, the Pandemic book, is out. Is it next year?
Yes, it's currently scheduled for March, but hopefully COVID behaves itself and we can...
Fingers crossed.
I should just say for anyone watching that I actually wrote the Pandemic novel before the pandemic hit. So I was working on this last year before it happened. So it was scheduled for release June this year, but obviously it got pushed back because it wasn't appropriate to release it. So that said, we have gone back and just added a little bit of a COVID reference here and there, because obviously it's going to be weird releasing a book after COVID and not mention COVID. But it was weird to be like doing a copy edit of it while watching it on the news going, this is kind of weird. I'm writing about a pandemic and one's happening. So very weird.
And when is your next Aurora book out?
That's a very good question, Eleanor. I'm currently writing it now. Thank you to all the Aurora readers. They're very, very patient. I had hoped to have it with the editor by now, but 2020 was just a bit of a sucky year and it slowed me down. But I'm back in the saddle and I'm writing it. I was working a little bit on it today. So I'm going to get it to readers as soon as I can.
Fingers crossed. Exciting. Well, thank you so much, Amanda. It was so great to chat to you about the series. And yeah, all the listeners, I hope that you can go away and just immediately pick up a good book, ideally this one, and read it. But thank you so much for joining us. And Amanda, I'm going to give you a solitary round of applause because we're not in a live audience, but thank you so much. It was incredible and I loved your reading. Bye, everyone.
Thank you very much. See you later.